She stumbled out of the heat with nothing but a torn cloth pressed against her chest. Blood had dried on her scraped knees in dark patches that cracked when she moved. Terror pushed her forward even when her legs begged to quit, even when her lungs burned like someone had poured hot coals down her throat. The sun hung straight overhead, white and cruel, and the ground burned her bare feet with every step. She could feel blisters forming, could feel the skin splitting open, but she did not stop. She did not know where she was running anymore. Every breath scraped her throat like sandpaper dragged across raw meat. Every heartbeat pounded in her ears like a drum warning her that they were still coming. She had left everything behind in the dark. Her voice, her name, her safety. The small wooden box where she kept her mother's ring. The dress she had worn to her first day of teaching. All of it gone. And she was sure, bone deep sure, that someone was still following. The land stretched out flat and endless in every direction. No trees to hide behind. No rocks big enough to crouch beneath, just grass and dust and sky that went on forever. She had never felt so small in her life, so exposed, like a rabbit running across open ground while hawks circled overhead. When she reached the line of fence posts and the wide open land beyond them, her knees finally gave out. She did not fall gracefully. She crashed. Her body hit the dirt hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. She rolled twice before slamming against the trunk of a cottonwood tree. For a long moment she just lay there, shaking so hard her teeth rattled, clutching the cloth to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Maybe it was. She forced herself to sit up, forced herself to press her back against the rough bark. She tried to make herself smaller than fear itself, smaller than the shadow of the tree, small enough to disappear. That was when the horse stopped. That was when the man stared. Now, before I go any further, let me tell you something about this story. This is not a tale about a perfect hero riding in to save the day on a white horse with guns blazing and music swelling. No, sir. This is something different, something truer. This is a story about a man with too many flaws and a woman with too much courage. It is about what happens when the world turns its back on the innocent and one person decides to stand anyway. It is about justice delayed but not denied. It's about truth buried so deep everyone forgot where to dig. And it is about two broken people learning that healing does not care about anyone else's schedule. If you have ever felt alone against the world, this story is for you. If you have ever wondered whether doing the right thing matters when everyone else looks away, keep listening. If you have ever loved someone who came into your life at the worst possible time, this one will hit you right in the chest. And if you want more stories like this one, stories that feel real and true and worth your time, make sure you subscribe before you go. Hit that button, join the family, because out here on the frontier, we take care of our own. Now let me tell you about Caleb Hart. Caleb did not move at first because he always looked before he acted. That was a lesson life had beaten into him over 49 hard years. Rushing got men killed. Silence kept them alive. Patience separated the living from the dead out here, where help was always too far away. He sat tall in the saddle with dust on his boots and eyes sharp as broken glass. His clothes were worn but clean. His hat had seen better days but still blocked the sun. His hands were rough and calloused, the hands of a man who had worked every day of his life. His jaw worked slowly the way it always did when he was chewing on a thought he did not want to feel. Side to side, grinding nothing. A habit his mother had tried to break when he was a boy. A habit his wife had teased him about when they were young and still believed in forever. He studied the scene in front of him like a problem waiting to be solved. A young woman in her mid-20s, bruised in places that made his stomach turn, barefoot with feet so torn up he could see blood mixed with dust. Breathing like she had run straight out of hell itself and the devil was still reaching for her ankles. No wagon, no supplies, no horse, no shoes, no story that ended well. His eyes stayed on her too long. That was his bad habit, the one he could never break no matter how hard he tried. He looked at people like they were puzzles, reading them the way other men read weather signs or cattle brands. He could spot a liar across a poker table from 20 feet away, could tell when a man was about to draw before the man himself knew it. But he never learned when to stop looking. Never learned that sometimes people did not want to be seen that clearly. Her hands trembled harder. He watched the shaking travel up her arms to her shoulders, watched her whole body vibrate like a tuning fork struck too hard. Panic rose in her throat like bile. He could see it in her eyes, the way they went wide and glassy, the way her breath came faster and faster until she was almost gasping. She had seen that look before. The one he was giving her now, the pause before a man decided what he could take, the calculation behind the eyes, the silence that came before violence. She pulled the cloth tighter against her chest, pressed her back into the rough bark of the tree until it scraped through what was left of her clothes, and forced the words out through cracked lips. "Do not look at me like that." The sentence cracked between them, sharp and fragile at the same time, like glass breaking in slow motion, like a whip snapping in cold air. Caleb flinched like she had struck him across the face with an open palm. The words hit harder than any fist could have, because they were true, because he knew exactly what she meant, because he had not even realized what his silence looked like from the other side. He looked down at his hands, suddenly aware of himself, suddenly aware of how that long stare must feel to someone already broken, someone who had probably been stared at by men who meant her harm, men who looked before they took. God Almighty, what was wrong with him? Slowly, carefully, like he was moving through water, he swung down from the saddle. He kept both hands where she could see them, palms open, fingers spread, nothing hidden, nothing held. He took off his coat. It was old but warm, made of good wool that his wife had picked out years ago at a general store in Amarillo. He had not let himself think about that in a long time. He laid the coat on the ground several steps away from the girl, then backed off again, put distance between them, gave her room to breathe. He turned his head, giving her privacy without making a show of it, looking at the fence line instead of at her, at the horizon instead of at her fear. "Use it," he said. His voice was low and calm, like a man talking to a spooked horse, like a man who knew that loud sounds and sudden movements could shatter something already cracked. And he kept his eyes on that fence line, on the post stretching away toward nothing. Only when he heard the rustle of fabric did he let himself breathe again. Only when the coat disappeared around her shoulder did his chest loosen. She did not move at first. He could feel her watching him even though he was not watching back, could feel her eyes on the side of his face like heat from a fire. Then slowly, like she expected the coat to vanish into smoke, she reached for it. Her fingers were shaking so bad she could barely grip the fabric. But she managed. She pulled it around herself, wrapped it tight, made herself a little safer. Her eyes stayed locked on him the whole time, wide, glassy, waiting for the lie to show itself, waiting for the trick, waiting for the moment when he would show his true colors and prove that he was just like all the rest. Caleb noticed the marks then, now that she was covered, now that he could look without making things worse. The bruises were not from falling. He had seen enough injuries in his life to know the difference. A fall left random marks, scraped knees, bumped elbows, bruises in places where the body hit the ground. These were different. These were the kind that came from a man grabbing too hard. Fingers wrapped around an arm and squeezing until something gave. A hand closed around a throat. Marks that told a story without words. The kind of story that made Caleb want to find whoever did this and teach him what fear really felt like. He did not ask questions, not yet. Questions could wait. Fear could not. "You are safe here for now." He meant it, every word. But he also knew how cheap those words sounded. How many women had heard that same promise from men who did not mean it? How many times that sentence had been a law dressed up in good intentions? Safety was a promise the West rarely kept. As he crouched to pour water into a tin cup from his canteen, the sleeve of his shirt slid back. Just for half a second, just long enough for sunlight to catch the pale ring on his finger, a mark where a wedding band used to be. He noticed it too late, saw her eyes drop to his hand, saw the way her face changed, the way something else broke inside her. A man who looked that long, a man who said gentle things, a man who had a wife. Of course, it was always the same story. Caleb followed her gaze and his jaw clenched tight. He pulled his hand away and rubbed the mark like it burned, like he could erase it with friction. Like 25 years of marriage and 5 years of silence could be wiped away with a thumb. He said nothing. Silence was his habit, his shield, his weapon. It had ruined things before. Out here on the frontier, a man's best habit could turn into his worst flaw without him even noticing. And Caleb Hart was living proof of that truth. Now here is the part most folks do not expect. Caleb was not staring because he wanted her. Lord, no, he was not that kind of man and never had been. He was staring because he was doing math in his head. How far she had run, based on the condition of her feet, at least 5 miles, maybe more, over rough ground without shoes. How long she had gone without water, based on her cracked lips and the way she swayed, at least a full day, maybe 2. How close the men behind her had to be, based on the fear still burning in her eyes, close enough that she had not stopped to rest, not even once. He had seen trouble ride in with manners and ride out with bodies. He had buried friends who trusted the wrong smile. He had learned to read danger the way other men read scripture. And he could already tell this was not a lost girl story. This was a hunted girl story. The kind that ended with a grave dug in secret. The kind where the body was never found and the questions were never asked. The kind where powerful men smiled at church on Sunday and did evil things the rest of the week, unless one man made a decision that ruined his own life. The girl finally took the cup. Her fingers brushed his for half a heartbeat, then snapped back like she had touched a hot stove. She drank too fast, choked, coughed water down the front of his coat, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and stared at the dirt. I cannot go back. 4 words, simple words. But Caleb heard everything underneath them. The tremor in her voice, the certainty that going back meant something worse than death. The desperate hope that this stranger might be different from all the others. Caleb did not ask where back was. He already knew it was not a place that deserved her. From the far road, a faint sound carried on the heat. Hoofbeats, the steady rhythm of riders where no one should be riding this time of day. Not in this heat, not on this road that led to nothing but his land and empty horizon beyond. Caleb stood slowly, his eyes narrowed against the sun, his ears strained to count the horses. 2, maybe 3, moving at a pace that said they were looking for something or someone, and he felt it then. The past he had buried, the wife people whispered about, the trouble standing right at the edge of his land like it had been waiting all along. He had a choice to make, and it would not leave his hands clean. Caleb did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the porch with a tin cup of coffee gone cold hours ago, listening to the dark breathe around his land. The crickets singing their endless singing, the coyotes calling to each other across the distance, the wind moving through grass like whispers he could not quite hear. The stars hung thick overhead, but he did not look at them. He kept his eyes on the road, watching for lanterns, listening for hooves, waiting for the trouble he knew was coming. The girl slept in the hayloft, wrapped in his coat and an old blanket he had dug out of a trunk, finally still after hours of shaking. But even in sleep, she was not peaceful. Every few minutes she would twitch, her whole body jerking like she was falling, like she was reliving the run, like even in dreams she could not escape whatever had sent her fleeing across the desert with nothing but a scrap of cloth and a desperate need to survive. And every time she twitched, Caleb felt something tighten in his chest, something that had nothing to do with fear, something he had not felt in a very long time. By dawn, he knew 2 things for sure. Someone was looking for her, and whoever it was, they were not coming with good intentions. He found her sitting up just after sunrise, knees pulled tight to her chest, arms wrapped around her shins, eyes fixed on the slats of golden light cutting through the boards of the barn. She looked worn in the morning, like the night had taken whatever little strength she had managed to save, like sleep had been a battle she only partly won. But she was awake, and she was a mopemwa, and when she heard his boots on the ladder, she did not scream. That was something. My name is Laya May, she said before he could ask anything. I taught school for a spell, 3rd grade mostly, but I helped with the older children when they needed it. I am not a child myself, even if I look like one right now. Her voice was quiet but steady, like she had practiced saying these words out loud during the long night, like she had prepared a speech to prove she was worth helping. I did not plan on ending up here, she continued. I did not plan on any of this. Most folks do not, Caleb said. It was not a joke. It was not a sermon either. It was just the truth, plain and simple. Nobody planned to end up desperate. Nobody woke up one morning and decided today was the day everything would fall apart. Life happened, and sometimes life was cruel. She told him enough to matter and not enough to bleed. Not yet. The bleeding would come later when she trusted him more, when she believed he would not use her pain against her. She had been staying with family outside Tascosa, her older sister Margaret and Margaret's husband, a man named Silas Klein, a man folks tipped their hats to in town. A man people trusted with their cattle and their money and their secrets. A man who smiled like a preacher and counted his coins like a banker and shook hands like your best friend. She stopped there for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the rough wooden floor of the hayloft, her fingers twisting together in her lap. He said no one would believe me. She paused, swallowed hard, and I believed him. For months I believed him. I thought I was the one who was wrong. I thought I was the one who was crazy. Caleb did not push. He did not ask for details. He did not need them. He had lived long enough to hear the truth in someone's voice, to recognize the sound of a person who had run because staying meant breaking. Some truths were too heavy to carry all at once. Some stories needed to be told in pieces. What surprised him was the rest. She had not just run with fear. She had run with something. Something Silas wanted back bad enough to send men after her, bad enough to chase her across miles of empty desert, bad enough to risk questions. From inside the folded cloth that she still clutched against her chest, she pulled a thin ledger page, creased and smudged from being held too tight for too long. Numbers written in a careful hand, columns that should have made sense but did not. I do not know what it means, she said, but he nearly killed me trying to get it back. Caleb took the page carefully, like it might crumble if he held it too hard. He read it once, the numbers swimming before his eyes. He read it again, slower this time, letting the patterns emerge. Then he went quiet in that way that made people uneasy. That way that meant his mind was working faster than his mouth could keep up. It was not a love letter. It was not a confession. It was worse. Weights that did not match what they should have been. Dates that skipped around like someone had something to hide. Marks and symbols that did not belong to honest ranch work. Cattle that vanished on paper and reappeared somewhere else with different brands. Money that moved in circles until no one could trace where it started or where it ended. This was not just bad record keeping. This was theft. Systematic and careful and bigger than one ranch. Bigger than one town. You did not steal this, Caleb said. It was not a question. She shook her head so fast, her hair whipped across her face. I found it. He hid it under a loose board in the floor, under the bedroom where I slept. I could hear it creaking at night, and I got curious, and I found it, and I thought. She stopped, swallowed again. I thought if I kept it, I could make him stop. I thought if I had proof, he would have to leave me alone. Caleb sighed through his nose, long and slow and sad. That was the trouble with truth in the wrong hands. It did not protect you. It painted a target on your back. That was when the hooves came again. Closer this time. Close enough that Caleb could count the horses. 2 of them. Moving at a walk now. No hurry, no rush. The walk of men who knew exactly where they were going. Caleb stepped to the fence line and waited. His hand did not go to the gun on his hip, but it stayed close. Ready. His eyes scanned the road. His jaw worked that old familiar pattern. 2 men rode up slow, their eyes scanning the ranch like they were measuring it, pricing it, deciding how much it might be worth to someone willing to take it. One of them smiled, the kind of smile that showed teeth but no warmth, the kind of smile preachers wore on Sunday when they talked about hellfire. The other one did not smile at all. His face looked like it had been carved from stone and left out in the rain until all the softness wore away. Morning, the smiling one said, pleasant as pie, friendly as a snake. Morning, Caleb replied, not friendly at all. The smiling man kept right on smiling. We are looking for a young woman. Might have passed through here yesterday. Dark hair, pretty enough, probably looks scared. Caleb leaned his weight against the fence post. Let the silence stretch. Let them wonder what he was thinking. Plenty of folks pass through, he said finally. Most do not stay. The men exchanged a look. The quiet one glanced toward the barn. His eyes narrowed. His horse shifted under him like it could feel the tension in his legs. That was enough. That one glance told Caleb everything he needed to know. They knew she was here, or they suspected. Either way, this was about to get complicated. You seen her or not? The smiling one let his grin slip just a little, just enough to show the mean underneath. This is a family matter, friend. Her people are worried sick. Caleb straightened up, took his weight off the fence, squared his shoulders. His voice did not rise, did not shake, did not waver. And somehow, that made it worse. You should ride on. The smile faded completely. The friendly mask crumbled away like old paint. What was underneath was not friendly at all. What was underneath was the face of a man who was used to getting what he wanted, used to people backing down, used to fear working in his favor. Now listen here, old man, the smiling one leaned forward in his saddle. You do not want this trouble. Silas Klein is a powerful man, a connected man. You give us the girl and we ride away and nobody has to get hurt. The quiet one reached for his reins, but he reached wrong. His hand went past the leather, past the horse's neck, toward the gun on his hip. Caleb moved before the thought caught up. It was not a fair fight and it was not meant to be. 20 years of ranch work had put muscle on his bones that most men did not have. 20 years of dealing with rustlers and snakes and everything else the frontier threw at him had put reflexes in his body that worked without asking permission. He grabbed the quiet one's arm and yanked. Hard. The man came off his horse like a sack of flour, hit the ground with a thud that knocked the wind out of him. Caleb was on him before he could recover. A knee in the back, an arm twisted up between the shoulder blades. The gun kicked away into the dust before it could clear leather. The smiling one went for his own weapon. Caleb looked up at him. Just looked. His eyes flat and cold as a January river. You really want to do that? Something in his voice made the smiling man stop, made his hand freeze halfway to the holster, made him recalculate the odds in a way he clearly did not like. This is not over, the smiling one spat. You just made a powerful enemy, friend. Then get off my land, Caleb said, and tell your boss that if he sends anyone else, they better bring more than two. He let the quiet one up, watched both men mount up, watched them ride away with their shoulders stiff and their backs straight and their pride wounded. One of them turned in the saddle, called back over his shoulder, Silas will not like this. Then Silas can come tell me himself. Caleb watched them until they were specks on the horizon, until the dust settled, until his heart stopped pounding quite so hard. He had crossed a line now, he knew it. There was no going back. No pretending this had not happened. No hoping they would give up and go away. In the barn, Leah stood frozen at the top of the ladder, her hand gripping the rails so tight her knuckles had gone white, her face pale as milk. You did not have to do that, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, Caleb said. I did. That was the moment he stopped pretending this was about charity, about Christian kindness, about doing it a good deed and moving on with his life. This was about a choice he had made a long time ago, after watching the wrong people walk free because no one wanted the trouble, after seeing bullies smile their way through consequences, after learning that silence in the face of evil was just another word for permission. I am not handing you back to him, Caleb said. His voice was firm but not hard. But I am not hiding you forever either. She swallowed hard. Then what happens to me? Caleb rubbed his jaw, thinking. He hated towns, hated courts, hated lawyers and judges, and all the fancy words they used to twist simple things into complicated knots. But he hated bullies more. We take this to the law, he said. Careful and quiet, someone who is not in Silas Klein's pocket. Her shoulders slumped. Relief and dread mixed together in equal measure. People already think things, she said, about you, about me. A young woman and an older man. They will make it into something ugly. Caleb looked away, toward the empty horizon. He thought about the ring mark on his hand, about the wife folks whispered about how easy it was for a story to get ahead of the truth, about how hard it was to put that genie back in the bottle once it escaped. Let them think, he said. Truth catches up eventually. He wanted to believe that. Lord, how he wanted to believe that. As the sun climbed higher, Caleb saddled his horse with the slow certainty of a man walking into a fight he could not avoid. He did not know yet that Silas had already been to town, that words had already been planted like seeds in fertile soil, that by the time they reached Amarillo, the story waiting for them would paint him as the villain. And if the law believed Silas first, would anyone listen to a rancher with a mound and a girl with nothing left to lose? Caleb chose Amarillo because it sat between nowhere and everywhere. Not too small to be blind to injustice, not big enough to be owned by one man. At least, that was what he hoped. They rode at a steady pace through the heat, not fast enough to draw notice, not slow enough to invite it. The sun beat down on their backs like a hammer on an anvil. The dust kicked up by the horses hung in the air behind them like a trail for anyone who cared to follow. Leia kept her head down, riding close behind him, his old coat still pulled tight around her shoulders, even though the day was warm enough to make sweat bead on her forehead. She did not speak much. Neither did he. Some roads were better traveled without talk. Some silences were more comfortable than any words could be. By mid-morning, the town came into view. Low buildings crouched under the sun like animals trying to escape the heat. Dust hung in the air like a second sky. People moved slow along the wooden sidewalks, saving their energy for things that mattered. Caleb felt the shift the moment they crossed the first hitching post. Eyes lifted, men paused in their work. Conversations stopped mid-sentence and started again in whispers. A woman gathered her children and hurried them inside. A shopkeeper who had been sweeping his porch suddenly found something interesting to look at in the opposite direction. Silas did not have to ride fast. He just had to send a man ahead with a story. And the story was already here, waiting. They went to a small office near the edge of town. A deputy sat behind a desk that had seen better days. Coffee rings stained the wood. Papers piled up in crooked stacks. A wanted poster on the wall showed a face that was probably dead by now. Caleb knew the deputy by sight but not by name. Had seen him at the general store once or twice. Had nodded to him on the street. That was usually enough in these parts. Enough to establish that you were not a stranger. Not a threat. Today, it was not enough. Leia spoke soft, hands folded in her lap, eyes down. She said only what she had to. The deputy listened with his arms crossed over his chest, his face set in that careful way men wore when they did not want trouble to stick to them. Caleb stood silent beside her, jaw tight, eyes watching every twitch of the man across the desk, every flicker of doubt, every moment of hesitation. The deputy nodded slow, asked a few questions, simple ones at first. Where was she from? How long had she been traveling? What exactly had happened? Then he asked a few more that cut sideways. And you say this man here found you on his land? Just happened to be riding by? That is right, Leia said. And he brought you all this way to file a complaint, out of the goodness of his heart. The way he said it made it sound dirty, made it sound like something else entirely. He was not just asking. He was testing, pushing, looking for cracks in the story, looking for reasons not to believe. Caleb could see it in the man's eyes, the way a ranch dog circles a stranger before it decides to bite or back off. The calculation, the suspicion. The deputy asked the same thing 3 different ways, and every time he did, Leia's fingers tightened in her lap. Her knuckles went white. Her shoulders drew up toward her ears. Caleb wanted to step in, wanted to say the words that would set everything straight, wanted to explain that he had nothing to gain from this, that he was just trying to do the right thing, that Silas Klein was a thief and probably worse and somebody needed to listen. But his mouth stayed shut. His jaw worked back and forth. His silence stretched out like a rope with no end. He hated himself for it. But silence was all he knew, all he trusted. Words had betrayed him before. Words had twisted in his mouth and come out wrong. Words had dug holes he could not climb out of. So he stayed quiet, and the quiet damned him. The deputy looked at him the way men looked at things they did not trust. A horse that might kick, a dog that might bite, a stranger who said too little and stared too long. He could hear exactly what the deputy was thinking without a single word being spoken. A scared young woman and a quiet older man. That story never ended gentle. Where had she come from? Why was she with him? Why had she run? Caleb answered when it mattered. He did not answer when it did not. Holding his tongue had always been his way of keeping control. It worked in poker when the stakes were high. It worked on the range when cowboys got too hot under the collar. It did not work here. By the time they stepped back into the street, Caleb knew they had not been believed. Not fully, not enough to matter. They had taken her name. They had taken his. They had written everything down in careful letters that would probably gather dust in a drawer somewhere. And they had taken a long look at his hand when he reached for the door. The pale ring mark did not lie, did not explain itself, just sat there like an accusation. Leia saw it too. She did not say anything, but her shoulders stiffened. The space between them grew careful again. The crust they paired and had started to build felt suddenly fragile, like ice too thin to walk on. They had not gone 3 blocks when Caleb noticed the men, watching from the shade of the livery stable. 2 of them, different from the ones who had come to his ranch, but cut from the same cloth. One of them smiled. Caleb recognized the look, the kind that said the story had already been told and the ending had already been decided. The kind that said, "You are in trouble now, friend, and you do not even know it yet." They turned down a side street, but it did not matter. By noon, word had reached the center of town. Tascosa was only a day away, but its influence reached farther than that. Silas Klein had friends, more than Caleb expected, more than a man should have if his money was honest and his hands were clean. The sheriff arrived in the afternoon. He rode in on a fine horse with silver fittings on the bridle. His badge caught the sunlight and threw it back like a warning. He greeted Caleb like an old acquaintance, shook his hand, called him by name, and he greeted Leia like a problem, like something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his boot. The talk was polite, too polite, every word measured and weighed, every sentence carefully constructed to sound reasonable while meaning something else entirely. The sheriff said Silas was worried sick, said the whole family had been up all night praying for her safe return, said family matters should be handled by family, said a young woman in distress sometimes said things she later regretted. Caleb felt the old anger stir, the one he kept buried deep down where it could not cause trouble, the one that wanted to grab this smiling sheriff by the collar and shake him until his teeth rattled. He answered carefully instead, measured his words, watched the sheriff the way he watched weather coming in across the plains, looking for signs of the storm, looking for a way through, but watching was not enough. The sheriff looked at his hand, at the ring mark, at the evidence of a wife somewhere in his past, then at Leia, at her youth, at her fear, at the coat she was still wearing that obviously belonged to a man, then back at Caleb. "You are a married man, Mr. Hart." The words hung in the air like a verdict already handed down, like a sentence already passed, like a door slamming shut on any chance of being heard. Caleb felt his jaw clamp, felt the words pile up behind his teeth, felt the explanation trying to force its way out, and he made the same mistake again. He went still instead of speaking. Stillness had kept him alive on the range. Stillness had won him poker hands when other men lost their nerve. Stillness had gotten him through 20 years of hard living in a hard land, but here it made him look like a liar, made him look guilty, made him look like exactly what they were accusing him of being. The street felt quieter all at once, like everyone in Amarillo was holding their breath, waiting to see what happened next. Caleb did not deny the words. Denial would have sounded worse, would have sounded desperate, would have confirmed what they already believed. He only said the truth was longer than that sentence. The sheriff nodded like a man who had already made up his mind and nothing was going to change it. "Until things are sorted," he said, "the young woman would be better off with her kin." 2 men stepped forward, the same ones from the livery. Their hands rested easy on their belts. Their eyes watched Caleb like they were hoping he would give them a reason. Leia took a step back, her hand brushed Caleb's sleeve. Just once, just a flutter of fingers against fabric. But he felt it like a brand. Caleb wanted to stop it, wanted to step forward, wanted to lay a hand on the sheriff's shoulder and explain how wrong he was, how dangerous, how sending her back was the same as signing her death warrant. But words were slippery here, and fists would only seal her fate, would only prove what they already believed about him, would only give them the excuse they needed to lock him up and throw away the key. They took her then, not rough, not gentle, just firm enough to say the law was on their side and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Caleb stood in the street and watched them walk her away. She looked back once. Her eyes met his across the growing distance. And in that look he saw everything. The fear, the disappointment, the tiny spark of hope that refused to die even now. He nodded once, a promise he was not sure he could keep. Then she was gone around a corner, and the street was empty, and the sun was still shining like nothing had happened at all. It was the hardest thing he had done in years. That night, Amarillo felt smaller than any stretch of open land Caleb had ever crossed. He sat alone outside the boarding house. The sounds of the town surrounded him but did not touch him. Piano music from a saloon down the street. Laughter from somewhere he did not belong. The clink of glasses. The murmur of voices. All the sounds of people living their lives without knowing or caring about the girl who had just been handed back to her nightmare. The ledger page was still folded in his pocket. He could feel it there, a small weight against his leg. The names and marks that did not line up. The proof that Silas Klein was a thief hiding behind a respectable name and a friendly smile. Caleb thought about the way Silas had sent men instead of coming himself. That told him something important. Silas was careful. Silas planned ahead. Silas had men who did his dirty work so his own hands stayed clean. Silas knew how to make problems disappear before anyone noticed. And Laya was a problem now. That was when Caleb made his second choice. He did not sleep that night. He sat on the hard wooden chair outside his rented room and watched the stars wheel overhead and thought about everything that could go wrong, about all the ways this could end badly, for him, for her, for everyone involved. But by the time the sky started to lighten in the east, his mind was made up. He rode north before dawn, past the sleeping town, past the places where gossip lived and rumors spread, past all the people who had already decided what the truth was without bothering to look for evidence. He headed toward Fort Elliott, where men wore badges that did not bend for local names, where cattle theft crossed enough jurisdictional lines that someone had to pay attention, where the law still meant something more than who you knew and how much money you had. The ride took most of the day. The sun climbed high and hot. The trail ran empty in both directions. Just Caleb and his horse and miles of nothing but grass and sky. He had plenty of time to think, maybe too much time. He thought about Evelyn, his wife, the woman he had married when he was young and stupid and believed that love could conquer anything. The woman who had left him 5 years ago, when the sickness came through and the work dried up and staying meant starving. She had gone east with a wagon train, looking for help, looking for hope, looking for something he could not give her. She had said she would write when she got where she was going. She had said she would send for him when she was settled. She had said a lot of things that never came true. The letter never came, no word at all, no way to know if she was alive or dead or somewhere in between. So he had stayed, kept the ranch running, kept his head down, let the years pile up like dust in the corners. People talked. They always did. Some said she had died on the trail. Some said she had found another man. Some said he had driven her away with his silence and his staring. He never corrected them, never explained, never took off the ring until it wore a permanent mark on his finger. What was the point? Words did not bring people back, and silence was easier than explaining a wound that never quite healed. By the time Fort Elliott came into view, the sun hung low and orange on the horizon. The buildings looked solid and serious, military neat, the kind of place where paperwork mattered and men followed rules. Caleb's back ached from the long ride. His horse was tired, but his mind was clear. The marshal listened longer than the deputy in Amarillo had. Not because he was kinder or more sympathetic, because the ledger made sense to him. He was a square-jawed man with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by a friendly smile. He looked at the numbers on the phone and tapped certain columns with a calloused finger. "These brands," he said, "they do not match any ranch I know of." "No, sir," Caleb said, "they do not. And these weights, these are not the weights of cattle that have been properly fed." "No, sir." The marshal leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. "Stolen cattle cross jurisdictions," he said. "Makes it a federal matter if it crosses enough lines. And it looks like Mr. Klein has crossed plenty of lines." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. The first real hope he had felt since watching them take Laya away. The marshal did not promise anything, did not say justice would be swift or sure, did not pretend that things would be easy. He only said that if Silas Klein was dirty, he would find it. And he said it in a way that made Caleb believe him. Caleb left Fort Elliott with no comfort, but with direction. Behind him, Laya was already being moved again. He could feel it in his bones. Farther from town, farther from help, farther from anyone who might ask questions. And Silas was probably smiling right now, thinking the worst was over, thinking he had won again like he always won, but the law had finally taken notice. And when it came looking, it would not come quiet. The question was simple and cruel. Would it come in time? Caleb rode hard from Fort Elliott, not reckless, not careless, just determined. The quiet, steady way men get when they know they are late but keep moving anyway. The marshal had not promised him justice. He had promised him attention. And out here in the territory, attention from the right man mattered more than 100 words from the wrong ones. The trail south ran dry and pale, the kind that showed every mistake a horse could make, every stumble, every hesitation. Caleb read it without thinking. The way he read weather, the way he read cards, the way he read people even when he did not mean to. He could tell where a rider had slowed, where one had looked back over his shoulder, where another had been dragged forward by fear instead of plan. They were moving Laya, not hiding her, moving her. That told him more than anything else. Men who believed they were safe did not rush. Men who believed the law was still sleeping did not change routes in the middle of the day. Silas was nervous now, and nervous men made errors. By late afternoon, Caleb found the first sign, a scrap of cloth caught on a mesquite thorn, pale against the red dirt. Not hers, the wrong color, but close enough to know he was on the right line. He did not call out, did not hurry, did not make any of the mistakes that eager men make when they are close to their goal. He followed the trail the way he had followed cattle for decades. Patient, exact, letting the land speak to him in its own language. As the sun dipped lower, the wind shifted. It came from the south now, warm and druttamara. And it carried sound, voices. Too far away to make out words, a horse snorting, metal touching metal, the clink of a buckle, the scrape of a gun in a holster. Caleb slowed, slid off the saddle without making a sound. Led his horse the last stretch on foot. Ahead, near a shallow bend in the Canadian River, 3 men waited. One paced back and forth like a dog on a short chain. One leaned against a scraggly tree with his arms crossed and his hat pulled low. One sat his horse too still, the kind of stillness that meant he was ready for trouble. Laya was not tied. That was the cruel part. She did not need rope. Fear was doing the work. She stood in the middle of them with her head down and her shoulders hunched, making herself small, trying to disappear. Then Silas Klein stepped into view. Clean shirt despite the dust. Calm face despite the circumstances. The same easy smile he wore when he shook hands with respectable men in town. When he made deals that always somehow worked out in his favor. When he convinced people to trust him with their money and their cattle and their llamas. He spoke to Leia like he was doing her a favor. Like she should be grateful he had come all this way to bring her home. Caleb watched from the brush and felt his jaw locked tight. This was the man people trusted. This was the man who smiled in church on Sunday and did evil things the rest of the week. This was the man who had hurt Leia and would keep hurting her until someone stopped him. Caleb could have shot him then. The thought crossed his mind, clear and simple. One pull of the trigger. End of it. But he heard the marshal's voice again in his head. If you act first, the truth never gets heard. So Caleb waited, and the waiting cost him. Silas slapped one of his own men, a sharp backhand across the face, quick and mean. The sound cracked across the riverbank like a whip. The man took it, did not fight back, did not even raise his hands to protect himself, just stood there and accepted it like a dog that had been kicked too many times to remember what fighting back felt like. Leia flinched so hard she stumbled backward. Her foot caught on a rock and she almost fell, almost went down in the dirt in front of all of them. That was enough. Caleb stepped out into the open. His hands hung low at his sides. Not threatening, not backing down either. His voice came out steady, out flat. The voice of a man who had made up his mind and was not going to change it. Let her go. The men spun around, hands going for weapons, eyes wide with surprise that turned quickly to anger. Silas did not look surprised at all. He smiled like he had been expecting this moment, like he had known all along that Caleb would follow, like this was all part of some plan only he could see. Well, 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 Silas spread his hands wide. The hero arrives. You really should mind your own land, Mr. Hart. His voice dripped false friendliness. Finmez, people are already talking. They say all kinds of things about you and this young lady. Terrible things. Caleb said nothing. The old silence settled in again, the habit he could not break. His jaw worked slowly. His eyes moved from man to man, counting weapons, measuring distances, calculating odds, 4 against 1. Bad odds by any measure, but not impossible. The smiling one he had thrown in the dirt at his ranch was here. The quiet one, too. Both of them looked like they wanted revenge. Both of them looked like they were waiting for Silas to give them permission. You know what I think? Silas took a step closer. I think you have been alone too long out there on that ranch. I think you forgot how the world works. You forgot that some men are important and some men are not. You forgot which kind you are. Still, Caleb said nothing. He could feel Leah watching, could feel her hope like a weight on his shoulders. The quiet one reached wrong. Caleb moved right. It happened fast. So fast that later he could barely remember the sequence. Just fragments, images, sensations. A shove into the riverbank, the splash of water, a fist that landed solid against bone, the crunch of knuckle on jaw, a gun kicked away before it could clear leather, skittering across the rocks, disappearing into the shallow water. Caleb took a hit to the ribs, felt something crack. Pain bloomed hot and sharp, but he had been hurt before. Pain was just information. Pain was just your body telling you something you already knew. He kept moving, kept fighting, kept doing what needed to be done. 2 of them went down, the smiling one and another whose name Caleb did not know. They went down hard and stayed down, groaning, clutching themselves. No longer a threat, the 3rd one backed off, hands raised, eyes wide, smart enough to know when the fight was over. Silas stood very still, his calm facade cracked now, his smile gone like it had never existed. What was underneath was something ugly, something that had probably always been there, but was usually hidden behind charm and money and the protection of powerful friends. You think this helps her? He spat the words like venom. You think anyone will listen to you now? A violent man who attacks people on the road, who takes advantage of young women in distress. Caleb stood between Silas and Leah. He did not look back at her, did not need to. He could feel her there, could feel her breathing, could feel her hope. That was the choice, clear as daylight. Then the sound of hooves came again, more than one, coming fast from the north. Silas froze, just for a second, just long enough for Caleb to see the fear flash across his face. The first real emotion the man had shown all day. The marshal rode in with 2 deputies, dust rolling behind them like a curtain being pulled back. No shouting, no drama, just authority arriving late but heavy. They pulled up their horses in a semicircle, blocking any escape. Their hands rested easy on their weapons. Their eyes took in the scene without blinking. The marshal looked at the men on the ground, at Silas standing stiff with shock, at Caleb bleeding from a cut above his eye, at Leah trembling but free. Silas Klein, he said, pleasant as you please, like they were meeting at a church social. You are a hard man to find. Silas recovered fast. He always did. That smile came back, not quite as convincing this time, but still there. Marshal, what a surprise. I was just helping my sister-in-law get back to her family. This man attacked us on the road. He should be arrested. The marshal nodded slowly, like he was considering the story, weighing it. That's so? He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back, did not say a word. The marshal turned to Leah. Miss May, would you like to come with us? We have some questions about cattle, brands, and ledger books. Nothing too complicated. Silas's face changed. The smile disappeared completely. What showed through was fear. Real fear, the kind you cannot fake. Now wait just a minute. His voice went high. That is private business. Family matters. You have no right to interfere in family matters. Stolen cattle are not family matters, the marshal said. His voice had gone hard now, all the friendliness stripped away. Fraud is not a family matter. And from what I hear, what you have been doing to this young woman is not a family matter either. He signaled to his deputies. They moved in. Professional, efficient, no wasted motion. They took Silas, not gently, not roughly, just firm, just final. The way men were taken when the game was finally up and everyone knew it. Silas watched it happen with eyes that kept looking for a door that was no longer there, kept looking for an escape that did not exist, kept looking for someone to buy or threaten or charm. There was no one left. When they put the cuffs on him, he did not struggle. What would be the point? The men who had worked for him were in no position to help. The badge and the gun and the law were all on the other side now. Leia stood shaking, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on the river like she was thinking about disappearing into it, like she could not quite believe this was real. Caleb said her name. Once. Soft. She looked at him, and something in her face changed. The fear was still there. Probably always would be, but there was something else now too. She nodded. Just once. The ride back to Fort Elliott was quiet. No celebration, no triumph, just the creak of leather and the clop of hooves and the slow, steady breathing of people who had survived something terrible. At the fort, the marshal did not thank Caleb, did not shake his hand, did not make speeches about justice and righteousness. He just said the case would move now, slow and thorough, the way the law moved when it moved at all. That was enough. As Leia was led inside to give her statement, she stopped, turned back. You did not have to do any of this, she said. Her voice was stronger now, still shaky, but stronger. Caleb shrugged. The movement made his cracked ribs scream. He ignored them. Somebody should have. The marshal watched Caleb for a long moment after Leia was gone. His eyes measured, calculated, decided. People say you have got a wife, he said. Caleb did not answer right away. His jaw worked. His eyes drifted to the ring mark on his finger, the pale band of skin that would probably never tan no matter how many years passed. Then he nodded. Once. That complicates things. Everything does, Caleb replied. The days that followed moved slower than Caleb expected, and heavier than he liked. That was the way the law worked when it decided to work at all. Slow steps, careful questions, men writing things down instead of raising their voices. Leia stayed near the fort. They gave her a small room that smelled of soap and dust. She answered questions when she could, stared out the window when she could not. Caleb waited outside more than once, hat in his hands, feeling older than he had in years, feeling every one of those 49 winters in his bones. The marshal kept his word. He did not rush. He followed the paper. Paper sounds boring until you realize paper is how men steal without firing a shot. A false brand on a calf is one thing. Easy to explain away. A mistake. A miscommunication. But a false number on a page can steal a whole ranch, can ruin a family, can destroy a life without anyone ever pulling a trigger. Caleb watched the marshal lay the sheets out on his desk, watched him tap certain names again and again, watched the pattern emerge like a picture coming into focus. Every time the marshal's finger landed on a name, Caleb felt the net tightening around Silas Klein. The man was not just cruel, he was careful, methodical, the kind of careful that comes from years of practice, years of getting away with it. Careful men do not get caught unless somebody makes them angry enough to slip. The ledger page Leia had carried was not the whole story. It was a loose thread, but loose threads led to knots, and knots led to men who pulled too hard. Within a week, names started to repeat in the investigation. Dates overlapped. Brands showed up in the wrong places. Money moved in patterns that only made sense if someone was stealing. Silas Klein stopped smiling. They brought him in for questioning twice. The first time he laughed it off, joked with the deputies, acted like the whole thing was a misunderstanding that would be cleared up any moment. The second time he asked for a lawyer. That told Caleb everything he needed to know, but the law was not finished, and neither was Silas. Men like him did not go down quietly. and they did not go down alone. One night a fire broke out at a holding pen near the river. By the time anyone got there, a dozen cattle were dead, and the records that went with them were ash. Another night a witness failed to show for his interview. His family said he had gone to visit relatives. They did not know when he would be back. They did not know where exactly he had gone. Then a man who had talked too much at a saloon packed up everything he owned and left town before sunrise. No forwarding address, no explanation. The marshal started sleeping with his boots on. So did Caleb. Leah noticed. She noticed everything now. Fear had sharpened her senses until she could read a room from a single glance, could feel danger before it announced itself. "I do not want this to follow you," she said one evening. They sat on a bench outside the fort. The air had finally cooled. Stars were starting to appear overhead. The first peace either of them had felt in days. Caleb looked out toward the dark horizon, toward all the empty miles between here and everything he had left behind. "It already has," he said. She studied him then, the way he used to study other people. Quiet, careful, looking for something beneath the surface. "They keep saying you have a wife." Caleb did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat, careful, like he was handling something that might cut him if he gripped it wrong. "I did," he said. "I think I still do. Legally anyway." That was when the past stopped being a rumor and started being a problem that demanded attention. Her name was Evelyn. They had married young and stubborn, both of them barely into their 20s, both of them convinced that love was enough to build a life on, that wanting something badly enough could make it happen. They were wrong, but it took years to figure that out. First came the sickness, a fever that swept through the territory and took more than it left behind. Evelyn survived, but she was never quite the same. Weaker, tired all the time, unable to do the work she used to do. Then the work dried up. Cattle prices dropped. Rain stopped falling. The land turned mean and unforgiving. Evelyn left with a wagon heading east, chasing doctors who might help, chasing family who might take her in, chasing hope that had dried up and blown away like everything else. "She said she would write when she got where she was going," Caleb said. "She said she would send for me when she was settled." She said a lot of things. Leah waited. She did not push, did not pry. "The letter never came," Caleb continued. "No word at all. After a while, I stopped checking the mail. Stopped hoping. Stopped everything except working and waiting. And the ring?" He looked at the pale mark on his finger. "I wore it until it wore a groove in my skin. Then one day I took it off. Not because I stopped caring, because the weight of it was killing me. So people filled in the space with their own stories. And I let them," Caleb said. "Easier than explaining. Easier than admitting I did not know what happened to my own wife." The marshal came to them the next day with news that changed everything. "We may need her," he said. "Evelyn, if she is alive." Caleb felt his stomach drop. All the old feelings he had buried came flooding back. The hope, the fear, the anger at being abandoned, the guilt at not going after her. Why? Silas has been careful, too careful. But there are gaps only someone close would know. Routes he used early on, names he trusted when he should not have. And your wife was in Tascosa 5 years ago, right when this operation was starting. If she saw something, if she knew something. The marshal nodded. She might be the missing piece. They found her 2 days later, not far, working at a boarding house near a rail spur. The marshal had asked around because people who disappeared often turned up where trains kept moving, where you could leave whenever you wanted, where no one asked too many questions. She was older now, thinner, lines on her face that had not been there before, but still standing, still alive. When Caleb saw her, he did not feel relief. He felt weight. All the years between them pressing down like stones. Evelyn's eyes were not soft, not welcoming, not anything like the girl he had married. "You never came looking," she said. Caleb held his tongue because she was not wrong. They stood in the dusty yard of the boarding house. The sun beat down. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal sounds, normal day. Everything around them going on like the world had not just shifted on its axis. "I heard you were still out there," Evelyn said. Her voice was flat. Careful, the voice of someone who had learned not to feel things too deeply. Caleb nodded, did not trust himself to speak. I heard you had trouble. He nodded again. She looked at him for a long moment, really looked, taking in the gray in his hair, the lines on his face, the years that had passed without either of them noticing. Then she sighed. Some of the hardness went out of her shoulders. You better come inside. This is going to take a while. They talked for hours, not about love, not about the marriage they had lost, about facts, about dates, about things Evelyn had seen during that last year in Tascosa before she left. She had not wanted to remember, had spent 5 years trying to forget. But memories do not disappear just because you want them to. They wait in dark corners. They come out when you least expect them. She told him about Silas Klein, about the meeting she had witnessed by accident, about the papers she had glimpsed, about the feeling she had always had that something was wrong even if she could not prove it. I thought I was imagining things, she said. I was sick, weak. Everyone said I was not thinking clearly, so I believed them. That was what men like Silas counted on, making people doubt their own eyes, their own judgment, their own sanity. She did not do it for Caleb, she made that clear. I am tired of men like him walking around clean while others pay the cost, she said. I am tired of keeping quiet because it is easier than fighting. Then she told the marshal what she knew. Dates, names, a night she had seen Silas meet 3 men by the river when she was walking off a fever, trading documents and money like it was nothing, like it was just business. It was enough. The marshal took notes, asked questions, wrote everything down in his careful hand. When she was done, Evelyn did not stay for coffee, did not stay for conversation, did not stay for any of the things that people did when they were trying to reconnect. She just looked at Caleb one more time, and in that look was everything that had gone wrong between them, everything that could not be fixed, everything that was finally, mercifully, being laid to rest. I hope she is worth it, Evelyn said. The girl you are protecting. Then she walked back into the boarding house and closed the door. Caleb stood there for a long moment, feeling the sun on his face, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. He did not try to follow. The case turned after that, quietly, decisively, like a key finally finding the right lock. Silas was brought in again, this time without smiles, without jokes, without any of the charm that had protected him for so long. The marshal laid out the evidence piece by piece, like a man setting down tools on a workbench, each one sharper than the last. That night, Silas tried one last move, not in the courtroom, in the dark. A man Caleb did not recognize waited by the wagon route outside the fort, acting like he belonged there, leaning against a post, rolling a cigarette. Caleb spotted him the way he always spotted trouble, a little too still, a little too ready, a little too interested in who was coming and going. The man stepped out as Caleb approached. His hand drifted toward his coat, toward the weapon hidden underneath. Caleb stepped in first. It was not a shootout, not the kind of thing they wrote songs about. It was a hard, close shove into the dirt, a wrist twisted until something popped, a knee in the back until the truth came spilling out. Silas had paid him to scare Leia quiet, paid him to make Caleb look like the villain, paid him to make sure no one believed what they were saying. The marshal heard that, and the last bit of protection Silas thought he had disappeared like smoke in wind. They took him away the next morning, in a wagon with bars on the windows, with deputies on either side, with his hands in cuffs and his future in ruins. Silas watched it happen with eyes that kept looking for a door that was no longer there, looking for an escape that did not exist, looking for someone to save him. There was no one left. Even the men who used to tip their hats to him in town would not meet his eyes now. Even the people who had smiled and shook his hand and called him friend. The town just exhaled. That was how it usually went. Not with a bang, not with cheering crowds, just a quiet collective sigh as the pressure finally released. Justice did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived with paperwork and witnesses and the quiet sound of a cell door closing. Leia stood beside Caleb as they watched the wagon roll away, growing smaller with distance, disappearing into the heat shimmer on the horizon. She did not speak, did not need to. Later that night, she found him sitting alone on the steps outside the barracks. The ring mark on his hand looked pale in the lamplight, pale and permanent. "It is finished," she said. "It is not," he said. She frowned, sat down beside him, close but not touching. He looked at her then, really looked, not the way he had that first day, not measuring, not judging, not trying to solve a puzzle, just seeing. "I still have to decide who I am when all this is over," he said. "What kind of man I want to be. What kind of life I want to live." She nodded slowly. "So do I," she said. They did not make promises that night, did not talk about the future, did not pretend that everything was fixed just because the villain was in chains. What they had both learned was that truth did not fix everything. It only cleared the ground. What came next would take time, patience, and a kind of courage that did not look like fighting at all. The law had done its part. Now the rest was up to them. The stillness that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. Silas was gone down the road under guard. His name was already shrinking behind him. The ledger was locked away in evidence. The talking stopped. The whispers faded. And the land around Fort Elliott went back to breathing the way it always had. Caleb stayed a few days longer than he planned. He fixed a broken rail in the fort's corral, helped shoe a horse that had thrown a shoe on the trail, sat on a bench in the evening and watched the light change from gold to orange to deep purple. He was not ready to go back to his empty ranch. Not yet. Not alone. Leah stayed too. Not because anyone told her to, not because she had nowhere else to go, because for the first time in a very long time, no one was telling her where she had to be. No one was making decisions for her. No one was watching her every move and waiting for her to slip up. Freedom felt strange at first, almost frightening. She had grown so used to being afraid that not being afraid felt like falling. But slowly, day by day, she found her footing. They did not rush anything. Men Caleb's age had learned long ago that rushing only created new problems. And Leah had learned in the hardest way possible that healing did not care about anyone else's schedule. Some mornings they spoke, sat together over coffee that had gotten cold because neither of them wanted to stop talking, shared stories about where they came from, what they had dreamed of when they were young, what they had lost along the way. Some mornings they worked side by side without saying a word, feeding horses, mending tack, doing the simple necessary things that kept life moving forward. Both ways felt right. One afternoon she asked him about the ranch, not the fences or the cattle or the business of running it, the quiet parts, why he stayed so far out where neighbors were miles away, why he did not move on when others did, why he chose solitude over company. Caleb thought about it longer than the question needed, turning the answer over in his mind like a stone in his hand. "I got used to the silence," he said finally, "and then I hid in it." She nodded like she understood more than he had said. When Evelyn left, Caleb had not chased. He told himself it was pride. She had made her choice and he had to respect it. She was a grown woman who did not need him running after her like a lost dog. Later, he realized it had been fear. Fear of hearing a truth he was not ready for. Fear of being told she had found something better. Someone better. Fear of confirming what he already suspected. That the silence he carried around like armor had pushed her away. Letting the years pass had been easier than facing the space they left behind. That was the thing about the past. It did not go away just because you stopped looking at it. It waited, patient as stone, ready to rise up the moment you let your guard down. When the paperwork was finished and the case was officially closed, the marshal brought Caleb one last set of documents. Nothing dramatic, just forms that needed signing. Official acknowledgement that his testimony had been received and recorded. Caleb signed where he was told, set the pen down, and for the first time in a long time, his hand felt light. Leah watched without saying a word. "It is done," she said. He nodded. "It is." They rode back to his ranch together a few days later, not like a parade, not like heroes returning from battle, just two people on horses, traveling the same direction, heading toward the same place. Summer had softened the land while he was gone. Grass pushed through the dry patches. The creek ran steady again after a few good rains. The cottonwood trees had leafed out full and green. Life did not reset just because you wanted it to. It continued. It kept going. It did not wait for you to catch up. At the ranch, Leah took her time finding her place. She did not try to take over. Did not try to prove himself, just watched and listened and learned. She helped with the books. Turned out she had a good head for numbers, could spot an error in a column faster than Caleb could find it, even when he knew where to look. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, when to rise, when to rest, when to push hard, and when to let things be. She asked questions that mattered, about the water rights, about the grazing patterns, about why he did things this way instead of that way. Caleb found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining things he had never had to explain before, putting into words knowledge that had lived in his bones for so long he had forgotten it was there. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted everything orange and gold, she stood by the fence and said something that stayed with him long after the words faded. "I used to think being strong meant not needing anyone," she said. "I used to think asking for help was weakness. Depending on someone else was failure." He waited, knowing there was more. "Now I think strength means choosing who you trust, opening up even when it is scary, letting someone see the parts of you that are not perfect." Caleb smiled at that, just a little, just enough to change his face. A year passed, then another. Talk reached them now and then. People always talked. That was the one thing you could count on in this world. People talked and weather changed and life went on. Some said Caleb had done right, stood up when it mattered, protected someone who needed protecting, been the man others should have been. Some said he had invited trouble, stuck his nose where it did not belong, made enemies he did not need to make. He let them talk. What mattered was quieter than that. One morning he found Leia in the kitchen, hair pulled back, reading a letter by the window. The light fell across her face in a way that made something catch in his chest. The sight stopped him cold. Not because it was grand or dramatic or anything special, because it was ordinary, because it was the kind of moment he had stopped hoping for years ago. That was when he understood what had changed. He was not fixing the past anymore. He was not waiting for something that was never coming back. He was building something new. They spoke about it plainly when the time came. No speeches, no grand gestures, no promises too big for daylight. She had chosen to stay. Long after the fear stopped running her life, long after she could have gone anywhere and done anything. She chose to stay right here, on this land, with this man, and when she said yes to him, it was her choice, plain and steady, unforced and unrushed. When they finally married, and it was after 2 full years had come and gone, 2 years of healing, 2 years of learning, 2 years of becoming the people they needed to be. The ceremony was small, a handful of witnesses, the preacher from the nearest town, a table borrowed from a neighbor, a breeze that blew through without asking permission. No one pretended it made everything perfect. No one stood up and declared that all wounds were healed and all problems were solved, because that was not how life worked, and they both knew it. Caleb still went quiet when troubled, still stared off at the horizon with his jaw working, still held back words that should have been said. Old habits died hard. Some of them never died at all. You just learned to live with them, learn to work around them, learn to forgive yourself for not being perfect. And Leia still woke some nights before dawn, still had dreams that made her cry out, still flinched sometimes at sudden sounds. But they knew those things about each other now. The broken parts, the jagged edges, the places where the cracks still showed. And knowing mattered more than pretending. There were nights Caleb sat on the porch until the stars faded, chewing nothing, jaw working, trying to solve something that could not be solved. And Leia would come out with a blanket, wrap it around his shoulders without saying a word, sit down beside him close enough to touch. That was their real marriage right there, not the vows, not the witnesses, not the piece of paper filed away somewhere official. Just two imperfect people choosing the same direction again and again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. There is a lesson in that. If you are listening, no one comes through life untouched. We all carry habits that protected us once and hurt us later. We all make choices that feel right at the time and heavy years afterward. What matters is not perfection. Nobody gets that. Nobody ever has. What matters is what you do when you finally see clearly, when the fog lifts, when the truth stares you in the face. Do you turn away? Do you hide in silence and let the years pile up like dust? Or do you step forward anyway? Knowing it will be hard, knowing it might fail, knowing that trying is its own kind of courage. Most men do not get in trouble because they are evil. They get in trouble because they keep doing the same small wrong thing over and over until it turns big. They let silence become a wall. They let pride become a prison. They let fear make all their decisions for them. Caleb Hart was not a perfect man. He stared too long. He stayed silent when he should have spoken. He let the years pile up instead of facing what he had lost. But when the moment came, when it truly mattered, he chose to be better than he had been. And sometimes that is enough. Out here on the frontier, a man does not get many chances to set things right. Life is hard. The land is unforgiving. Second chances are rare as rain in August. When one shows up, you take it. You grab it with both hands and hold on tight, or you carry that regret like a stone for the rest of your days. Caleb took his chance. He stood up when it would have been easier to look away. He protected someone who had no one else. He faced his past instead of running from it again. And in the end, he found something he had stopped looking for. Not a second chance at the life he lost. That was gone forever. But a new life, built slow and steady, built honest, built with someone who understood that healing takes exactly as long as it takes. Leah found her voice again, the one Silas had tried to silence. She found her strength. The kind that came not from needing no one, but from choosing who to trust. Together they built a life that was not perfect, but it was theirs, and that was more than enough. If this story hit you somewhere real, tap that like button before you go. Subscribe to the channel. Become part of this family we are building here. Because out here on the frontier, the next tale is always waiting. Just beyond the fence line. Just over the horizon. Just around the next bend in the road. Let me leave you with one question before we ride on. Have you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken? Have you ever let silence build a wall between you and someone you loved? And if you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you still choose the easy quiet, or would you choose the hard right thing? Think about it, because out here in the West, and maybe everywhere else too, the only thing worse than making a mistake is making the same one twice. Caleb learned that lesson the hard way. Maybe we all do, but the beautiful thing about tomorrow is that it gives us another chance. A chance to speak up, a chance to step forward, a chance to be better than we were yesterday. And that, friend, is a story worth telling.